Waiting for the little. Good morning. Welcome to the 5 After. Hope you guys enjoyed week 2 of Quarantine Quarrels. I thought Chris did a great job this morning. So we're joined this morning by Chris and Kim. Say hello, guys.
Morning.
Hey, y'all.
We're joined this morning by Chris and Kim. Hey, and my volume is up on my phone as I'm watching for comments. So and folks jumping in. Although actually I just jumped on YouTube to do that. Let me change that again. So I'm going to start this off nice and smooth this morning, make it look easy. So, Chris, why did you bring your lovely bride with us this morning?
Well, because it's impossible to have conflict with yourself unless you're schizophrenic. So, honestly, I mean, I talked a lot about conflict today, and of course, conflict that Kim and I have had and how we've dealt with it in public and stuff like that. And I just thought it'd be good for both of us to be able to talk about, and for you to be able to get her perspective on how to be able to, how we handle conflict, because we do have conflict.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I work with both of you, and on one or two occasions, I have seen some conflict exist between the two of you. Typically, we call that Mondays at 10:55. Hey, I want to say hello to a couple folks who've jumped on already this morning, to Matt and Joy and Kristen and Jeff and Dion and Sabrine, and Sheila. So just happy to see you guys jump on here this morning. Glad you guys are joining us. So we're in this series called Quarantine Quarrels, and we're just, while all the things we're talking about apply to being on quarantine, they also apply to just being in relationship with other human beings, because all the things we're talking about are problems we've all kind of dealt with long before we were stuck in a house together. We just may have kind of run for the hills. We may have evaded sometimes that. So Chris, talk about some of the things that how that applies to you. Like, conflict existed in your marriage before you guys were both working from home.
Yep, it did. And I'll tell you, we started our marriage with a lot of conflict. We're both high D's or reds if you've done the Quarantine Quarrels with North Point stuff. And so we both have very strong opinions. And that's good. But our first couple of years of marriage, particularly our first year, we had to figure out how we were going to do life together without killing one another. So, so we just had to learn about finances. We had to learn about how to live together, how to pick up after myself and things of that nature. And it was just, like I said, we just had a lot of conversations. And I know I said some things hurtful. You said some things hurtful. And just trying to balance that and yet maintain the relationship was a struggle. And we just kind of came up with things that we said we weren't going to say, things we weren't going to do. And that's been helpful for us over the years. Mm-hmm. What about you, Kim?
Yeah, I mean, I think we also came from very different households. The way my parents handled conflict and the way your parents handled conflict was very different. So I think we came in, me kind of having that background, you having yours. And, I probably related to you the way I saw my parents relate. You related to me. And then when I felt like that wasn't working, I would try a new tactic, just like, let's experiment with how are we going to communicate? How do we work through things that we don't agree on, or that we, you have one idea, I have a different. So yeah, so it's definitely been a process, and I feel like there are seasons that we do well, and still to this day, almost 27 years later, there are times that we blow it pretty badly.
Yeah, absolutely. And we try to learn from our mistakes and try to do better the next time. Yeah. So.
Well, awesome. Well, thanks for that. I want to say good morning to Crystal and Michelle and Kimberly for jumping on here with us. If you've got questions about today's sermon, about conflict in marriage or just relationships in general, would love for you to throw those in the comment line. We would like to answer those questions for you as best we can on the fly. Chris, a minute ago, you just said that early on in your marriage and kind of figuring out conflict, there were some things you decided that just were going to be off the table. These are things we're not going to say or not going to do. would you expound on that? Like, what did those practically look like?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I said some of this in the sermon today, but well, we weren't going to cuss at one another. We weren't going to throw things at one another. We weren't going to get physical with one another. We never ever mentioned divorce. That's a really big one, because I feel like so many times today, because every marriage is going to have conflict. The marriage that does not have conflict is a marriage where one person is throwing the towel, and that's not healthy. So we just said, you know what, we're never ever going to mention us breaking up, because one of the things we've realized is if divorce is an option, eventually you will take it, because things will suck and things are going to get bad, and you're going to want out. And that probably was the biggest one that we talked about, and we joked about, yeah, we're not going to mention divorce, but we'll mention murder and mayhem and all that stuff. And that kind of brought a little bit of release to the tension. But what's some of the other things that we said we weren't going to do?
We don't compare. That was really a big one for me. I don't want to be compared to any other female or woman, not his mom, not his sister, not, somebody famous. And so we don't say, I wish you were more like.
Yeah, that's good.
I wish you, had the qualities of this person or that person, because that's, God made us each to be who we are.
Yep.
And we need to encourage each other in our gifts and in our strengths, and grow through our weaknesses. And so that's a big one, is just, don't compare. Don't throw out, well, so-and-so's husband or so-and-so's wife.
Or this person on TV or this woman in the movies. We never do that.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I know the divorce topic, Chris, you just mentioned a second ago. I know one of the things when Rhonda and I have done a lot of premarital counseling with folks, one of the things we talk about is like being on a merry-go-round. The fast ones, like on the playground. And when you get in the middle, you're good. But as soon as you lean out a little bit, that centrifugal force will throw you off and spin you out. And that's kind of how we talk about divorce. As soon as divorce is an option, you'll lean towards it, and then life will spin and things will be said and friends will give bad advice. And before you know it, the centrifugal force of coming out of the middle, of having that as an option, it'll throw you out much faster than most people realized. And there are many marriages that we've sat in our office and talked with folks about who didn't really think divorce was an option, but they left it as an option. And then they found themselves standing right at the front door of walking through that. And so great advice there. I'm going to say good morning to Dave Thompson, Williams, Ramon, Sterling, Hilmo, Janice Shepard says hello this morning to everybody. And let's see here. Looks like Michelle Clark chimed in with a comment. Kim, you want to see what we've got there from Michelle? Can you see that?
Let me read it. We realized that healthy arguing with each other in front of the children was so important, because we didn't want to give them a false sense of their own marriages that couples never argued. It was even more important to our kids to see how we work through those arguments. So that's actually a good perspective, Michelle. It really is. So I know I'd mentioned in the sermon not arguing in front of your kids. But as I also mentioned, kids aren't stupid, and they know what's going on. So I think it's definitely important that once it's resolved, to be able to talk about that with the kids. That's always helpful. I know, who was it? I think it's you, Lou. You always kind of use the illustration that it's kind of like mom and dad fighting. They reconciled, but the kids did not experience the reconciliation. Don't you say something like that?
Yeah. Do you really want me to use this line?
Yeah, that's fine.
It's funny. It's one that I'll be using probably in 2 weeks when I do the message on divorce proofing your marriage. And you mentioned you talked about this in your sermon. It's the problem with taking your fight outside of you and your spouse is that when my wife and I have a disagreement, if she runs home to her mom or to her best friend, and especially parents, when you're young married and you go to your parents and you tell them about this awful thing your husband has done to you, well, you go home and have makeup sex. And so everything is resolved with you and your spouse, but your parents don't get to have makeup sex with your husband. And so they still carry all this tension and all this angst towards your husband. because look what they did to my child, my little baby. Like, he's not treating her well. And so what was a problem in the moment that's been resolved and made up, now you've created this team of people who are possibly cheering for your marriage to fail. Because they're going to continue. Well, you remember when he did that? You remember when he did this? Because they didn't get the completion of the argument. And so, the phrase I use is no one else gets to have makeup sex with your spouse. And so be careful what fights you take outside of your marriage, because now you're going to create people who are against your marriage.
That's a great point in the fact that, and I said this in the sermon, that, this speak the truth in love. And I kind of was a little hard on the ladies, but many times, and ladies and men do this, but men not as much, because they don't really talk to other guys about relationships and feelings, right? But many times ladies can go out and they can bash their husband to their girlfriends or this or that. And then, like you said, the husband and wife get to make up, but all your girlfriends know is that your husband is a creep. And when things get bad again, those girlfriends are going to encourage you to leave him. And that's a good point. Anything you want to say about that, Kim? Okay.
No, I mean, and that's not just true with the wife. I mean, there's a reason we have this idea that, the biggest enemy of your marriage is your mother-in-law. For a lot of wives, your husband's mom is your biggest enemy. Because a lot of times, husbands will go to mom, well, she doesn't cook the way you cook, and she doesn't clean house the way you clean house. And, once again, you've created this enemy of your marriage unintentionally, where, once again, mama's little boy isn't being treated the way that, that mom thought this woman coming into his life would treat him. And so those outside voices can be so important, and we need to pick what we allow them to speak into our marriages. So I do really love Michelle's point there about, I thought about this when I was watching the sermon, there are conflicts that Rhonda and I have that we intentionally have in front of the children, just because we want them to know that when they get married, that there will be disagreements, and we want them to have a place to see how those are resolved healthily. And then there's bigger disagreements that we have that sometimes we go off and have alone, because once again, we don't want to create insecurity in our kids. But it's, and doing premarital counseling, you realize how many people come to get married and have no idea how their parents resolved conflict. They've never seen it done because their parents always did it off alone. And they either thought their parents had a perfect marriage and never fought, or they just never saw it resolved. So I think that's super important. Sabine had a comment here for us. My favorite advice is to remember you are on the same team. Don't fight each other, but fight for each other.
That's good.
Absolutely.
Very good, Sabina.
Yeah. Chris and I have a saying that we heard one time. It's a sermon or counseling, I'm not sure, but to say to your spouse, and especially in your own mind, you are not my enemy. Chris is not my enemy. Your spouse is not your enemy. And of course we're talking today about, mostly healthy marriages. Granted, there are some relationship issues that are dangerous, and we want to acknowledge that. So please don't hear us saying today that if you are being mistreated or abused in any sort of way, that, you're just supposed to be quiet and take that. I would just want to put that out there. But in a marriage that is mostly healthy, where you're moving in the same direction, you're both on the same page, you're following Christ, you're raising your family according to what the Bible says. I mean, even in that, you're going to still have conflict. But Chris is not my enemy. At the end of the day, we're on the same team. We're moving in the same direction. Right. So, and I think that too means that sometimes, when we're on the same team, we recognize when we have to give up some things that seem super important to us. If you tend to be, I am a very detailed person. I want things done a certain way. But I don't want to be selfish in that. And so there are times that I have to realize I got to lay this down for the greater good of my relationship with Chris, or for the greater good of my family. Whether or not the toilet paper goes over or under may not be the thing that, no, don't go there, Lou. Don't go there. That's you're laughing because you won.
Well, no, I did not win.
Yeah, you have won that one. But anyway, no, there's no winners. But
no, there's a winner on that one. If you look at the patent for toilet paper, it's clearly over.
Well, let me read this verse. This is Ephesians 6:12. For we are not fighting against flesh and blood enemies, but against evil rulers and authorities of the unseen world, against mighty powers in this dark world. And I think that's a good reminder that, again, like you said, I'm not the enemy. You're not the enemy. We do have an enemy, and he's trying to destroy our marriage. That's prowling like a roaring lion. But you're not him, and I'm not him. Right. So you're not the angel of light.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, there's a backstory behind this. Hang on. One of the guys that Kim dated before me, and his name is, I'm joking, he's not a good person. And if you're watching, you know who you are.
Oh my gosh.
What? He's not a good person. Anyway, he told Kim, he says, I think you're the angel of light. And I'm like, why didn't you just haul off?
Explain what that means.
Angel of light is one of the synonyms of the devil, Diablo. So, and I told him, why didn't you just punch him in the mouth? But anyway.
You've been sent to test me.
Oh my gosh.
You've been sent to test me.
So, almost seal the deal.
All right, Chris, our argument for toilet paper may have just taken a large hit. Matt agrees with us, so we may have lost some credibility.
Come on now. Everybody's going to gang up on Kim. Has to be over. Has to be under.
But, I mean, this is a great point. Honestly, toilet paper or how you squeeze the toothpaste. Yeah, toothpaste. That's a big one. Here's the thing. Yeah, are you going to let small things like that ruin a marriage? Right. And honestly, sometimes marriages are ruined over small things like that build up over time, where there's never ever any release, there's never ever any talking it out or forgiveness. And it's just, it's sad when that happens.
I think, though, those are symptoms of a bigger issue. And I think that issue is expectation.
Okay.
And we've talked about this a lot through the years in marriages and in relationships. If I have an expectation of you, but I've not voiced that, there are desires and there are expectations. So if my desire is to have the toilet paper go one way or the other, or the toothpaste to be one way or the other, really, that's just a symptom of a bigger issue inside of me. Really, it may mean that I want to be heard, or that simple thing may feel like security to me, or that you see me, or that you hear me. And so I think we really have to pull the lens out and look at the bigger picture of, is this expectation, is this something that's moving us forward, or is it something that's tearing us apart?
That's good.
In the long run, a year from now, is it going to matter? Is this thing that I'm so fixed on right now, that seems so life-changing, earth-shattering, I have to have it this way, is it truly going to matter? And so if you've got a desire, it's not that desires are wrong.
Sure.
Speak it out. Talk to your spouse about it. Chris uses the example of the nightgown, if any of you have ever seen that, where he holds up a pretty cute little nightgown, and then he holds up like one of those deer skin flannel 15 buttons up the front, long sleeve down to the floor, and he says when you get married, the husband may have the expectation of this, the cute fancy little lingerie, and then the wife may be like, well, I get cold at night, so I'm going to sleep in this 15 layer parka nightgown thing. Yeah. And so what has been a desire of a husband then becomes an expectation. I expect you to do this. And so really the communication there is so important. Don't allow the externals to affect your heart and your mind to the point that you've built a wall between you and your spouse.
Now, what Kim just mentioned, and maybe Peyton can put this up there, but on our app, our very first marriage series we did at oneChurch.tv, it was called Summer Lovin'. And we did an entire series on desires and expectations, and what do you do when desires become unmet and they start feeling like expectations that feel like weight. And you can go on our oneChurch.tv app and you can scroll down. I'll tell you some other marriage series that we've done. I think that's been helpful. We did a series back in 2012 called Home Wrecker, which was very, very good, and we just talked about affair proofing your marriage. And we did another one called Bedroom Confessions. And so I would just encourage you guys, if you haven't already, download the oneChurch.tv app and just go through. And it may just be something as simple as you listening to it by yourself, or maybe doing that with a spouse. And there's small group questions that you can kind of interact with. So I would just encourage you to just go ahead and do that.
Great segue to small group questions. I'm going to throw those up now, actually. So for this week, and you see their big idea today was a healthy marriage isn't measured by a lack of problems, but how we handle them. And so I'm going to scroll down a little bit there. Chris, you got a favorite question you'd like to power through here?
I am looking through it now, my friend.
Oh, there's one. Number 3. What kind of conflict do you remember having in your first year of marriage? We had lots of that.
You want to share?
Oh, it was me. It was totally me. I'll take all the blame for it.
You don't have to take
We've
all the
shared
blame.
before, I put the diagram in the refrigerator of where everything was supposed to go. And, the pillows had to be arranged in a certain way on the couch, in the bed. It was totally me. So I was the conflict.
It really wasn't, because I'll tell you, other parts that I contributed is just the whole fact of I was a spender. Those first 3 or 4 years, I just spent money. And that caused a lot of conflict in our marriage. You were the saver. I was the spender. So it wasn't all just you. It wasn't all just you. What about, this is question 2. What did you learn from your parents about handling conflict, good or bad? You answer that, Kim.
Jump on that one real quick. Let me jump on that one because this is a funny one for Rhonda and I.
Okay.
My parents got quiet and didn't talk to each other when they were upset. My parents were a little more vocal. My parents never threw anything at each other, but it was not uncommon to hear something be thrown in another direction. And so for me growing up, fights were big and loud. And so when we got married, I remember I was working like 50, 60 hours a week. Rhonda was in college, and she would be home a lot. And I would come home from work, and she would say something, and I would say the wrong thing. And then she would go in the other room and get quiet. And I was like, she loves me so much. She's going to let me sit here and watch a ball game in peace and quiet after I've worked and talked to people all day. She is the best wife ever. And the entire time, she's in the other room just angry that I'm not pursuing her to end the silence, because the silence was the fight. And so I had no idea we were even fighting because I was dumb. And so, what your version of conflict that you bring into marriage is super important.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's good, Lou.
Absolutely. My parents didn't yell a lot. I knew that they had conflict, but they generally resolved it. My dad was a sergeant major in the Army, and so he just had this tone that he could bring out that, oh my gosh, it just stopped everything. Like, yes, sir. We just kind of all went into that mode. But I did see them resolve things in a healthy way. So what about you?
I would just say, talking about your parents, your dad he could be angry and he could yell really quickly, and then your mom, she was the freeze out type of person.
Oh, yes.
She could go for days or weeks without talking to someone. So now, again, my family did not deal with that, and I'm not going to tell you how my family did because my mom's watching. Because I'm no dummy. But there was no freeze out. It was more we talked it out, and I'm just going to stop right there.
She can be pretty powerful.
Yeah,
Mom you are a powerful woman, Sheila. You are powerful.
That's right. Embrace your power. So anyway, but
well, those small group questions are also available every week on the One Church app. So that's a chance for you to dig into the message a little deeper each week. I had a comment here from Janice. Said all this info is good for relations with your grown children, friends, and coworkers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So, Chris, if you had to give a takeaway from today, if you had to, one thing you tell folks to start with, the most important thing, kind of where would you land on that?
Well, I would just say, and this goes way beyond marriages, okay? But don't walk away from relationships because there's a conflict. Luther, you and I have talked about this week. Don't walk away from and it had nothing to do with you or I, Lou, but just to stick it out and love that person enough to be able to talk it out. And so many times it's so easy to walk out the door, whether it be a marriage or a friendship or whatever that looks like. And the thing I would encourage you to do is to, there's a great verse in Romans chapter 12. I want to say it's verse 18. Somebody check me on that. But It says that as far as it depends upon you, live at peace with all people. And there are limits to that. There's sometimes you can't live at peace with all people, but do everything that you can to make that happen. Jesus, he said it this way. He says, what does it depend upon you? Well, you turn the other cheek. You give your shirt off your back. You give a coat. You take it. Was that right?
Yep.
So Romans 12:18. So I just encourage you, don't walk away from relationships, because here's what's going to happen. Whether it be in a marriage relationship, a friendship, you're going to leave. You're going to walk out the door, and the commonalities you take with you is that you're you. And you're going to have issues with the next relationship, the next romantic relationship, the next friendship, whatever that looks like. And it's going to be easier for you to walk away again, until eventually relationships just become disposable. And you don't ever really work it out. There's never any conflict resolution. And you just they disappear. And I don't think that's right. I don't think that's what God has called us to do with the relationships. Mm-hmm. He's called us to go deep, and as far as it depends upon you, have peace and harmony.
And when you invest in something, when you invest in someone, I mean, it's worth it. Yeah. If you think about things in your life that you've invested in, whether that's your career, or maybe you love doing things in your home and making it nice, or whatever. I mean, you get to enjoy the work that you've put in. You get to see the benefit of that. And relationships are the same way. Yeah. You get to reap the benefits of spending time together and talking through things that maybe aren't easy to talk through. But guess what? You're not going to die. Luther, I feel like I sound like you. You didn't die, right? You talk through it. You work through it. And was it hard? Yes. Were there just those moments of I hate this? Yes. But in the end, it's absolutely
the relationship is worth it.
Yes.
Exactly right.
Yeah. And it's funny, we think so many times that the opposite of conflict is peace, and it's really not. The opposite of conflict is apathy. Because anything that you value, you're willing to step into conflict for. When you're not willing to step into conflict, that's apathy, and that's where you've quit and you've given up. And so I think it's good that we realize that our marriages are worth fighting for because they have value and we haven't given up. Chris, I just want to speak to the wisdom that you have had this morning, because not only was your mom on here watching, I want to welcome Bob Edmondson to the 5 Acts, who was also on here watching this morning with Jonathan Mayfield and my wife and some other folks who've jumped in. Lauren Blumenberg. So I want to apologize if I missed saying hello. Michelle Clark chimed in, said, and she's exactly right here. It's easier to quit than it is to make things work. And we aren't quitters. Once again, conflict is worth it over apathy. Yep.
Absolutely.
Guys, we're going to wrap this up this morning. So glad you guys jumped on here and hung out with us this morning. Appreciate all of your likes and virtual high fives. And, for us, this is the foyer in the theater. This is where we hang out at the Next Steps table on Sunday mornings, and you get to come by and hug our necks and tell us what you loved about the sermon, what you're going to go home and apply, question what we told you in the sermon. And so we just love having this opportunity to continue to have that relationship with you, where church is a conversation and not just you being told what to do. So we're so glad you guys hung out with us this morning. Chris, Kim, any closing thoughts? And I'd love for you to pray us out before we head off, and encourage you guys, if you haven't watched service yet, jump on, do that, share it. It's available on all the platforms for on demand now. So
anything you want to say?
I think what we just said, investing in relationships is worth the work that it takes. So don't be quick to run. Don't be quick to give up. Don't bail out too soon. Love the other person the way you want to be loved. Forgive the other person the way you want to be forgiven. Be to them what makes you feel special. And I promise it'll make a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the thing that keeps on rolling through my mind, and it may be shallow, so I'm going to throw that out there, but it's from Captain America, the first Avenger. You remember when Steve Rogers, he's this 90-pound weakling, and somebody's just wailing on him in the alleyway, and somebody says, "Why didn't you run?" And he says, "If I start running now, I won't stop running." Remember that? That's such a great scene. And that is just one of those things I would encourage everybody, whether you're in a marriage, whether you're in a friendship, whatever that looks like, is don't start running. Battle it out. And sometimes it is a battle. And I just simply also want to speak this before I pray. If you're in a marriage that's not in a healthy place, know this: we're not condemning, we're not throwing stones. Just know that we love you and we're praying for you in any way that we can help out as a church, any way that we can help you get counseling. We want to be able to do that because we believe that you're worth it and your relationship is worth it. So just know we have walked through 27 years of marriage, and it's not all been sunshine and roses. And I don't believe probably your relationship that you're thinking about right now is probably sunshine and roses either. So I would just encourage you, know that we would love to pray for you, and anything that we can help, we want to do that with you. Okay? All right, I'll pray. Heavenly Father, God, I just thank you so much, Lord, for your love and your grace. And I thank you so much, God, that, Lord, relationships are worth it. That ministry is all about relationships. It's not about what you know. It's not even about programs or what you do or anything like that. Lord, it is about relationships and people. And God, I pray for those folks right now who are just struggling with people, struggling with conflict, struggling with just all the idiosyncrasies of personalities, and sometimes how frustrating that is, God. And it would just be so much easier if it was just us or just people just like us, God. But Lord, you are a multifaceted, creative God, and we are all made in your image. That's what Psalm 139 says, that we are made in the image of God. So God, I pray, Lord, that in our communities, Lord, that we would be able to listen first, and we are slow to get angry, and we are quick to listen, God. I pray, Lord, that we would be able to look through other people's eyes, through their perspectives, and not demonize one another, and value relationships over being right in conflict, God. And Lord, that we would not write somebody out of a relationship. God, I know with everything that's happening with racial reconciliation, everything's happening in our country, God, I pray that if we're white, that we would listen. If we're African American, that we would listen. And Lord, that we would be able to love that individual, somebody who is made in the image of our Heavenly Father. Lord, your word says so clearly that that we are made one in you, Jesus Christ. And I pray, Lord, for those marriages right now who they feel like they're divided. I pray, Lord, that you would just remind them of their oneness, that you would remind them that they are worth the fight, and that they would fight for one another, not just with one another. For it's in Jesus' wonderful name that we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thanks for joining us, guys. We will see you next week.